Welcome to today's episode of Survival Stories. Imagine standing in the middle of an African savanna 3 million years ago. The sun beats down mercilessly, and around you stretch waves of tall grass, taller than you are. You're barely 4.5 feet tall, with arms slightly longer than your legs, and you're standing upright on 2 feet in a landscape designed for giants. Above, vultures circle lazily in the thermal currents. Somewhere in that ocean of golden grass, predators lurk: leopards with powerful jaws, hyenas that hunt in packs, saber-toothed cats that can crush bone with a single bite. You have no claws, no sharp teeth, no venomous sting. You can't outrun most predators. You can't climb trees as well as your ancestors could. Your skin is thin, your body weak by comparison. By every measure, you should not survive here. Yet you do. Not only do you survive, you thrive. Your descendants will inherit the earth, building cities and civilizations, creating art and technology that no other species could imagine. But that future is millions of years away. Right now, in this moment, you face an immediate question that will determine whether your lineage continues or ends in the belly of a predator. How do you survive in a world where the grass grows taller than your head, where danger hides in every shadow, where food is scarce and competition is fierce? This is not a story of dominance. It's not a tale of humanity's inevitable rise to power. This is the story of vulnerability, adaptation, and the incredible journey of our ancestors who learned to survive against impossible odds in a landscape that seemed designed to kill them. For millions of years, the grasslands of Africa were a testing ground, a brutal, unforgiving environment that shaped every aspect of what it means to be human. The decisions made by our ancestors in those ancient savannas echo in our bodies and minds today. Join us as we explore how early humans survived in the world of tall grasses. Chapter 1. When the forests began to vanish, the world was changing, and our ancestors could feel it in their bones. Millions of years ago, the landscape of East Africa looked dramatically different from the savannas we imagine today. Dense, lush forests covered vast regions, providing endless canopy where our ape ancestors swung from branch to branch, feeding on abundant fruits and leaves. Life in the trees was relatively safe, food was plentiful, and the forest floor where predators roamed was a place to be avoided. But around 10 million years ago, the planet entered a period of dramatic climate change. Global temperatures began fluctuating wildly, swinging between warmer and cooler periods with increasing intensity. These shifts weren't gradual transitions that gave species centuries to adapt. They were rapid oscillations that could transform an ecosystem within a few generations. The effects were felt most acutely in Africa, where the climate became progressively drier and cooler. As rainfall decreased and temperatures dropped, the great forest that had dominated the landscape began to retreat. Trees that once stood tall and densely packed started to thin out, creating gaps in the canopy. The forest fragments became islands separated by expanding grasslands. C4 grasses, a type of vegetation specially adapted to drier conditions, began spreading across the continent. These grasses thrived in the new climate, growing taller and denser, creating vast open spaces punctuated by scattered woodland patches and riverside galleries of trees. The expansion of grasslands didn't happen overnight. Scientific evidence from ancient soils and fossilized pollen suggests that grasses covered about 7 to 8% more land every million years. This slow but relentless expansion meant that over the course of several million years, the landscape transformed from predominantly forested to predominantly grassland. By about 2 to 3 million years ago, grasslands dominated much of East Africa, fundamentally altering the environment where human evolution would unfold. For our ancestors, these changes presented an existential crisis. Species that were perfectly adapted to forest life suddenly found their habitat shrinking. Food sources became scattered and unpredictable. The safety of the trees was no longer always available. Some ape lineages retreated deeper into the remaining forests, holding on to their traditional way of life. These species, including the ancestors of modern chimpanzees and gorillas, maintained their adaptation to dense woodland environments. But one branch of the family tree made a different choice, or perhaps had no choice at all. Our direct ancestors found themselves increasingly living in what scientists call mosaic environments, landscapes that were neither pure forest nor pure grassland, but a complex mixture of both. These regions featured patches of woodland along rivers and valleys, interspersed with expansive grasslands and scrublands. This mosaic environment created both challenges and opportunities. On one hand, it meant our ancestors could no longer rely solely on forest foods. On the other hand, the grasslands were teeming with large herds of animals' potential sources of food if only our ancestors could figure out how to exploit them. The fossil record tells us that between 6 and 7 million years ago, the earliest members of the hominin family species, like Sahelanthropus chidensis, were already showing signs of adaptations to this changing environment. Their skulls show a foramen magnum, the hole where the spinal cord exits the brain, positioned in a way that suggests they held their heads upright rather than forward like quadrupedal apes. This small anatomical detail is crucial. It indicates that even our earliest ancestors were beginning to experiment with walking upright. By about 4 million years ago, species like Australopithecus afarensis, famously represented by the fossil skeleton Lucy, were clearly adapted for walking on 2 legs, though they retained features like curved fingers that allowed them to climb trees when necessary. These early hominins lived in environments that were becoming increasingly open, with grasslands forming a more prominent feature of the landscape. They were creatures caught between 2 worlds, no longer fully adapted to life in the trees, but not yet entirely committed to life on the ground. The environmental pressure was immense and unrelenting. As the forests continued to fragment and grasslands expanded, our ancestors faced a stark choice: adapt to the new conditions or face extinction. Many hominin species did go extinct during this period, unable to cope with the dramatic environmental changes. But our direct ancestors possessed something special: a flexibility and adaptability that would become the hallmark of the human lineage. Rather than specializing for one specific environment, they became generalists, capable of exploiting multiple habitats and food sources. This adaptability was crucial because the environment didn't simply transition from forest to grassland and then remain stable. Instead, the climate continued to fluctuate dramatically throughout human evolution. Wet periods would temporarily restore some woodland areas, only to have them disappear again during subsequent dry periods. This variability meant that survival favored those who could adjust their behavior and diet based on changing conditions. Those who could switch between different food sources, move between woodland and grassland, and modify their survival strategies as circumstances demanded. The grasslands themselves presented a radically different environment from the forests. In the dense canopy, danger could be seen and heard from relatively short distances, and escape routes into the trees were always nearby. But in the open grasslands, visibility worked both ways. Yes, you could see farther, but predators could also spot you from much greater distances. The tall grasses, some growing 6 to 10 feet high, created a maze where threats could hide just a few feet away, invisible until it was too late. Our ancestors found themselves in a landscape where they were highly visible when standing, but easily hidden when crouched, where food sources were scattered and unpredictable, and where water was often scarce and concentrated, in specific locations that attracted both prey and predators. The transition from forest to grassland wasn't just an environmental change. It was a fundamental shift that would reshape every aspect of hominin evolution. It would influence how we moved, what we ate, how we socialized, how our brains developed, and ultimately what made us human. The world of tall grasses became both our greatest challenge and our proving ground. And our ancestors' responses to this challenge would set the stage for all of human evolution. Chapter 2. The adaptation of walking tall in the world of tall grasses. The ability to see over the vegetation became a matter of life and death. Our ancestors made a choice that would fundamentally alter the human body plan. They committed to walking upright on two legs, a trait scientists call bipedalism. This adaptation, which seems so natural to us today, was actually quite radical and came with significant trade-offs that tell us just how crucial it was for survival. Walking on two legs wasn't entirely new to our ape ancestors. Large primates like orangutans had been walking upright on tree branches for millions of years, using their hands to grasp overhead branches while their legs supported their weight below. When moving along thin, flexible branches high in the canopy, an upright stance was actually more stable than a quadrupedal one. Our ancestors inherited this capability, but they adapted it for a completely different purpose, not moving through trees, but traversing the open grasslands. The advantages of bipedalism in the grassland environment were numerous and significant. Most obviously, standing upright elevated the head above the tall grass, providing a crucial vantage point. Imagine being a relatively small hominin in grass that grows 6 to 8 feet tall. On all fours, you would be completely blind to your surroundings, unable to see predators approaching or locate the scattered trees and water sources that you depend on for survival. Standing upright transformed you from a creature lost in a maze into one that could survey the landscape, spot dangers from a distance, and navigate efficiently between resource patches. This elevated viewpoint wasn't just useful for avoiding predators, it was equally important for finding food. In the savanna mosaic, resources were patchily distributed. Fruit-bearing trees might be scattered across the landscape, requiring our ancestors to remember where they were and plan routes between them. Standing tall allowed them to orient themselves, identify landmarks, and move purposefully through the environment rather than wandering aimlessly through the grass. Bipedalism also freed the hands for carrying. This might seem like a minor advantage, but it was actually revolutionary. A quadrupedal ape can only carry food in its mouth, or, at best, awkwardly under one arm while moving on 3 limbs. A bipedal hominin can carry food in both hands while walking, allowing them to transport much larger quantities. This capability opened up entirely new survival strategies. Our ancestors could now gather food from scattered locations and bring it back to a central place where the group could share it. They could carry their infants while foraging, rather than relying on infants to cling to them. They could collect and transport tools and other useful items over long distances. The ability to carry things had profound social implications. When individuals could transport food back to share with others, including those who couldn't forage that day, perhaps because they were injured, caring for young or too old to travel far, it created an economic interdependence that strengthened social bonds. This sharing wasn't pure altruism. It was an insurance system where everyone contributed when they could and benefited when they needed help. Bipedalism made this system possible by solving the logistical problem of how to transport resources back to the group. Walking upright also improved thermoregulation in the hot, open savanna. Standing bipedally exposed less body surface area to the direct overhead sun compared to walking on all fours. While a quadrupedal animal exposes its entire back to solar radiation, a bipedal one exposes only the head and shoulders during the hottest part of the day. This reduction in sun exposure, combined with the fact that there's cooler air farther from the ground, helped our ancestors avoid dangerous overheating. Additionally, the upright posture allowed air to flow more freely around the body, enhancing cooling through evaporation of sweat, another crucial human adaptation we'll explore later. But bipedalism didn't come without costs. Walking on 2 legs required extensive modifications to the skeleton and musculature, and these changes created new vulnerabilities. The pelvis had to become shorter and broader to support the weight of the upper body and internal organs while standing upright. The spine developed an S-shaped curve, the lumbar lordosis, that helped balance the body over the hips. The legs became longer and straighter, with the femur angled inward so that the knees were positioned directly under the body's center of gravity. The foot transformed from a grasping organ, capable of gripping branches, into a platform designed for bearing weight, with the big toe aligned alongside the other toes rather than opposable. These modifications were mechanically necessary for efficient bipedal locomotion, but they created problems that humans still suffer from today. The lower back curve that allows us to balance upright also makes us prone to back pain, especially as the muscles and ligaments weaken or if the curve becomes too pronounced. The narrow birth canal, a consequence of the reshaped pelvis, made childbirth more difficult and dangerous for human females than for other primates. The foot, optimized for walking rather than grasping, meant that our ancestors lost much of their tree climbing ability, making them more vulnerable on the ground and less able to escape into trees when threatened. Perhaps most significantly, bipedalism initially made our ancestors slower, not faster. Humans are not particularly fast runners compared to the predators and prey animals of the savanna. A leopard can reach speeds of 45 miles per hour. Even a warthog can outrun a human over short distances. This meant that our ancestors couldn't rely on speed to escape predators or catch prey. They had to develop other strategies, and the fact that bipedalism persisted despite this disadvantage tells us that its benefits must have outweighed this significant cost. Fossil evidence shows us that the evolution of bipedalism was gradual and involved considerable experimentation. Early hominins like Australopithecus afarensis, who lived about 3 to 4 million years ago, were clearly bipedal when on the ground. Their footprints, preserved in volcanic ash at Latolia in Tanzania, show a distinctly human gait pattern. Yet their skeletons still retain features like long, curved fingers and relatively long arms, suggesting they were still partially adapted for climbing. These were transitional creatures, competent at walking on the ground, but also capable of climbing trees for safety at night or to access fruits that other ground-dwelling animals couldn't reach. By about 2 million years ago, with the emergence of species like Homo erectus, we see hominins with body proportions much more similar to modern humans. Longer legs, shorter arms, a more barrel-shaped chest, and feet fully adapted for walking. These later species had fully committed to life on the ground, and their skeletons show that they were capable of walking long distances efficiently, a crucial ability in the vast, open grasslands where resources might be separated by many miles. The commitment to bipedalism was one of the defining choices in human evolution. It didn't make our ancestors stronger, faster, or better armed, but it gave them height in a world of tall grass, freed their hands for manipulation and carrying, improved their efficiency in the hot sun, and fundamentally changed how they could interact with their environment. This adaptation, born from the necessity of surviving in increasingly open habitats, became the foundation upon which all other human characteristics would build. Every time we stand, walk, or run, we were using a mode of locomotion that was refined over millions of years in the African grasslands, a legacy of our ancestors struggled to survive in a world where seeing over the grass could mean the difference between life and death. Chapter 3. Life is prey, not predator. For millions of years, we've told ourselves a comforting story about human evolution, that our ancestors were mighty hunters, apex predators who dominated their environment through intelligence and tool use. But the fossil record tells a very different, more humbling tale. For most of human evolutionary history, our ancestors weren't the hunters, they were the hunted. The world of tall grasses was filled with predators far more powerful than any hominin, and survival meant learning to avoid becoming someone else's meal. The predator guild of ancient Africa was staggeringly diverse and deadly. The landscape was home to cats much larger than any alive today. Saber-toothed cats with enormous canines designed to pierce thick-skinned prey. Leopards powerful enough to drag carcasses weighing more than themselves into trees. And massive false saber-toothed cats that combine the killing power of big cats with the pack-hunting strategies of wolves. Hyenas were bigger than some species reached the size of modern bears, with jaws powerful enough to crush the largest bones. Crocodiles lurked near every water source, and massive eagles patrolled the skies, capable of plucking young hominins from the ground. The evidence that our ancestors were prey comes from multiple sources, and some of it is chillingly direct. In South Africa, paleontologists discovered the skull of the Taung child, an Australopithecus africanus individual, who died about 2.8 million years ago. For decades, scientists debated what killed this young hominin. Recent analysis of the skull reveals distinctive puncture marks on the eye sockets that match precisely the talon spacing of large African eagles. The Taung child was almost certainly killed and carried off by an eagle, just as modern eagles in Africa still occasionally prey on monkeys and small antelopes. Other fossils tell similar stories. The skull of a Paranthropus child from Swartkrans Cave in South Africa shows damage consistent with leopard canine teeth. Bite marks on hominin bones from various sites match the dental patterns of hyenas and large cats. Even more recently, in 2025, researchers used artificial intelligence to analyze a jaw fragment from Homo habilis and concluded it showed tooth marks from a leopard, meaning that even members of our own genus with their larger brains and stone tools were still prey to big cats as recently as 2 million years ago. Statistical analysis supports these individual cases. Scientists studying modern primate populations have found that predation rates on primates typically run about 6 to 10%, meaning that in any given population, roughly 1 in 10 individuals will be killed by predators. Analysis of ancient hominin sites suggests our ancestors face similar or even higher predation pressure. The presence of hominin bones in leopard dens the association of hominin, remains with predator tooth marks, and the demographic patterns in fossil assemblages all point to the same conclusion. Predation was a major cause of death among early hominins. This predation pressure shaped every aspect of how our ancestors lived. Unlike modern humans who can arm themselves with weapons and build secure shelters, early hominins had extremely limited defenses. They weren't particularly strong compared to other primates of similar size. Their canine teeth, which in many primates serve as weapons, were relatively small and blunt. They couldn't outrun predators. Their climbing ability, while better than ours, was degraded by their commitment to bipedalism, meaning they couldn't always escape into trees as effectively as their ape cousins could. In this context of vulnerability, being prey wasn't just an occasional danger. It was a defining fact of existence that influenced behavior every single day. Where to sleep became a life or death decision. Ground sleeping would have been suicidal in areas with high predator density, so many early hominins likely continued to sleep in trees despite their terrestrial daytime activities. The presence of hominin fossils in caves suggests that some populations discovered that rocky shelters offered protection, though these same caves also attracted predators seeking similar refuge. Where to forage had to be constantly balanced against predation risk. Open grasslands offered visibility in certain foods, but also maximum exposure to predators. Woodland patches provided concealment and refuge, but reduced visibility. Our ancestors had to constantly calculate these trade-offs, deciding how long to remain in exposed areas and when to retreat to safer spaces. This constant vigilance shaped cognitive abilities, the need to track predator movements, remember dangerous locations, and predict threats helped drive the evolution of larger, more capable brains. Water sources presented particular dangers. In the savanna, water was often scarce and concentrated in rivers, lakes, and seasonal pools. These locations naturally attracted both prey and predators. Our ancestors needed water daily, but approaching a waterhole meant taking enormous risks. Crocodiles lurked in the shallows. Big cats staked out positions near drinking spots, knowing prey would eventually have to come. This created a pattern still seen in African savannas today, where animals approach water cautiously, in groups, taking turns to drink while others watch for danger. The seasonal nature of predation risk added another layer of complexity. During dry seasons, when water was scarce and concentrated, predator-prey interactions intensified. Prey animals were forced into smaller areas around remaining water sources, and predators concentrated there too. For our ancestors, the dry season would have been a time of maximum danger, requiring heightened vigilance and perhaps changes in behavior like staying closer to protected areas or foraging in larger groups. But being prey didn't just create problems, it also drove solutions. Anthropologists now believe that many distinctly human characteristics evolved specifically as anti-predator strategies. Our unusual sleeping patterns, with continuous sleep through the night rather than the fragmented sleep of other primates, may have evolved as an adaptation to sleeping in groups where individuals could take turns keeping watch. Our acute sensitivity to threats, the anxiety we feel in unfamiliar situations, our tendency to startle at sudden movements or sounds, all these psychological traits likely have roots in our evolutionary history as prey. Most importantly, predation pressure likely accelerated the evolution of human sociality and cooperation. Primates that live under higher predation pressure tend to live in larger, more cohesive groups. Groups provide multiple benefits: more eyes to watch for predators, dilution of risk. Any individual's chance of being targeted drops as group size increases, and the possibility of active defense through mobbing or collective threat displays. For our ancestors, forming tight social groups wasn't just about cooperation for foraging. It was about survival in the face of constant predation threat. The fossil record shows a turning point around 1.5 to 2 million years ago. Predation pressure on hominins appears to have decreased during this period, even as it remained constant or increased for other primates. What changed? This was the period when early Homo species showed evidence of more sophisticated tool use, better social coordination, and possibly the controlled use of fire. These developments would have made our ancestors much harder prey. Tools could serve as weapons for defense. Better cooperation allowed coordinated responses to threats, and fire kept predators at bay during the vulnerable nighttime hours. One species that apparently couldn't adapt to predation pressure was Paranthropus, our robust cousin. Despite having larger teeth and jaw muscles than early Homo, and likely being physically stronger, Paranthropus went extinct around 1 million years ago while Homo survived. Anthropologists theorized that Paranthropus, specialized for processing tough plant foods with its powerful jaws, couldn't develop the behavioral flexibility that helped Homo cope with predation. While Homo responded to predation with tools, fire, and complex social strategies, Paranthropus seems to have lacked these adaptations and paid the ultimate price. The legacy of being prey remains with us today. Our fear responses are social nature, our tendency to imagine threats even where none exist, our preference for sleeping in enclosed spaces rather than open areas. All these aspects of human psychology echo our ancestors' experience of living in a landscape where death could come from any shadow in the tall grass. Understanding that we evolved as prey, not predators, helps explain many otherwise puzzling aspects of human behavior and cognition. We didn't conquer the grasslands through dominance. We survived them through caution, cooperation, and creativity in the face of constant danger. Chapter 4. The Revolutionary Power of Stone Amid the Tall Grasses of Ancient Africa. Approximately 2.6 to 3 million years ago, one of the most transformative moments in human history occurred. An innovation so powerful that it would echo through the millennia and fundamentally alter the trajectory of our species. Our ancestors discovered that by striking one stone against another in just the right way, they could create sharp edges and useful tools. This seemingly simple act was actually a cognitive and technological breakthrough that gave vulnerable hominins a way to access food sources previously beyond their reach. The earliest stone tools, discovered at a site called Nyanga on Kenya's Homa Peninsula, represent what archaeologists call the Oldowan industry, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where such tools were first extensively studied. These tools might not look like much to the modern eye. They consist of simple stone cores with flakes removed, sharp-edged flakes themselves, and hammerstones showing battering from use. But in the hands of our ancestors, these unassuming rocks became the difference between starvation and survival. Making even these simple tools required capabilities that no other animal possessed to the same degree. It required understanding material properties, recognizing that certain types of stone like flint, quartz, and obsidian fracture predictably and can be shaped to desired forms. It required fine motor control to strike a core stone at precisely the right angle and force to produce a useful flake. It required planning acquiring suitable raw materials, which often meant traveling several miles to locations where good stone could be found, and transporting these heavy materials back to areas where they would be needed. At the Nyanga site, researchers discovered that our ancestors were traveling 6 to 8 miles to obtain the best quality stone for their tools. This is farther than any living non-human primate is known to transport materials. It demonstrates not just physical capability but cognitive sophistication. Our ancestors had to remember where good stone sources were located, plan journeys to collect them, and have the foresight to know they would need these materials later. This kind of planning and delayed gratification was unprecedented in the animal kingdom. The immediate impact of stone tools on survival was dramatic and measurable. As Rick Potts of the Smithsonian Institution put it, with stone tools, hominins suddenly evolved a brand new set of teeth outside the body. A stone flake could cut through hide and meat better than a lion's canines. Hammerstones could crack bones to access marrow better than an elephant's molars could crush vegetation. These tools expanded the range of foods accessible to our ancestors, particularly animal-source foods that provided dense calories and nutrients. Before tools, accessing large animal carcasses was nearly impossible for our ancestors. Their small, flat teeth couldn't tear through the thick hide of a dead hippo or buffalo. Their weak jaws couldn't crack open bones to reach the marrow inside. But with stone tools, a group of hominins could approach a carcass, perhaps an animal that died from disease, injury, or was killed by predators, and efficiently extract meat, fat, and marrow before competitors arrived. The evidence from Nyanga includes butchered hippo bones showing clear cut marks from stone tools, demonstrating that 2.9 million years ago, our ancestors were using tools to process large animal carcasses. This ability to access animal resources was transformative for several reasons. Animal foods, meat, fat, bone marrow, and brains provide much more concentrated calories and nutrients than most plant foods. A kilogram of meat provides roughly 2,000 calories and complete proteins. A kilogram of fruit provides maybe 500 to 600 calories and incomplete proteins. For a hominin with an increasingly large, energy-hungry brain, access to these calorie-dense foods made the difference between merely surviving and thriving. Stone tools also expanded the range of plant foods our ancestors could exploit. Many nutritious plants have tough outer casings, hard shells, or woody exteriors that are difficult or impossible to process without tools. With hammerstones, our ancestors could crack nuts, pound tough roots and tubers to make them digestible, and process seeds. This expanded their dietary breadth, making them less vulnerable to seasonal fluctuations in food availability. When one food source was scarce, they had the tools to exploit alternatives. The technological know-how to make stone tools had to be passed from one generation to the next through social learning. Unlike instinctive behaviors that arise automatically, stone tool manufacture requires observation, practice, and teaching. Young hominins would have watched adults making tools, tried to replicate the process, and received feedback and correction. This transmission of knowledge through generations created the foundation for cumulative culture, the ability of groups to build on previous innovations and pass increasingly complex knowledge down through time. Who made these earliest tools remains one of paleoanthropology's most intriguing mysteries. For many years, scientists assumed that only members of the genus Homo made stone tools, hence the name Homo habilis, handyman, given to fossils found with tools. But the discovery at Nyanga of Paranthropus teeth, alongside old Dowan tools, complicated this picture. Paranthropus, with its massive jaws and huge teeth optimized for grinding tough plant foods, wasn't supposed to need stone tools. Yet here were the oldest known old Dowan tools associated with Paranthropus fossils. Does this mean Paranthropus made tools? Or were early Homo and Paranthropus both present at the site, with Homo making tools while Paranthropus perhaps scavenged the results? Or could both lineages have independently discovered toolmaking? Scientists still debate these questions. What's clear is that by 2.6 million years ago, stone tool technology had become established in the hominin repertoire and would never be abandoned. Over the next million-plus years, hominins continued to make old Dowan tools, gradually refining their techniques. Archaeological sites from this period show that our ancestors were selective about where they made tools, often creating them near food sources or at favored camping locations. They would use tools repeatedly at specific sites, creating concentrations of artifacts that suggest our ancestors were beginning to organize their landscape, returning to productive locations again and again. Around 1.7 million years ago, a new and more sophisticated tool technology appeared. The Acheulean industry, characterized by large, symmetrical hand axes carefully crafted by removing flakes from both sides of a stone core. These teardrop-shaped tools required more planning, more precise flaking, and probably more teaching to master than simple old Dowan tools. The appearance of Acheulean technology roughly coincides with the emergence of Homo erectus, a species with a significantly larger brain than earlier hominins. This correlation suggests that increased brain size and technological sophistication went hand in hand. But we shouldn't imagine that stone tools immediately transformed our ancestors into dominant predators. The tools were useful, even revolutionary, but they were not weapons in the way we typically imagine. Stone flakes are excellent for cutting meat from bones, but they're not effective for hunting dangerous animals. There's no evidence from this early period that hominins were actively hunting large game. Instead, they were likely scavenging using tools to quickly extract resources from carcasses they found or perhaps drove other scavengers away from. This scavenging lifestyle would have been challenging and dangerous. It meant competing with hyenas, jackals, and vultures for access to carcasses. It meant operating in environments where the predators that made the kill might still be nearby. It required speed in processing carcasses before competitors arrived. Stone tools made this possible by dramatically reducing the time needed to access meat and marrow. What might take a group of chimpanzees hours to accomplish with their teeth and hands, a group of tool-using hominins could do in minutes. The social implications of tool use were profound. Tools became valuable resources that had to be shared, managed, and sometimes defended. Individuals who were skilled at making tools would have been valuable group members, perhaps gaining status and mating opportunities through their expertise. Sites where good tool-making stone was found would have become important locations, possibly leading to territorial behaviors. The knowledge of how to make tools became cultural capital, passed down and potentially improved upon by each generation. Stone tools also required our ancestors to plan ahead in ways that were novel for primates. They had to anticipate future needs and prepare for them, collecting good stone even when not immediately needed, making tools in advance of hunting or foraging trips, and maintaining toolkits over time. This kind of forward planning and delayed gratification required cognitive capabilities that would continue to expand throughout human evolution. Perhaps most importantly, the invention of stone tools demonstrated that hominins could overcome their physical limitations through technology. They were weak, slow, and poorly armed by nature, but they could arm themselves through their own creativity and skill. This established a pattern that would define human evolution going forward, rather than relying solely on biological adaptations that took thousands of generations to develop. Humans could create cultural and technological adaptations that could spread and improve within just a few generations. In the world of tall grasses, where physical prowess wasn't enough to guarantee survival, the ability to create and use tools gave our ancestors a crucial edge, not dominance, but just enough, and Vanish to persist, to learn, and eventually to thrive. Chapter 5. The strength of many. A lone hominin in the African grasslands was dead hominin. In an environment filled with predators far more powerful than any individual, and with food sources often too large or dangerous for one person to exploit, survival depended on something that would become one of the most distinctive human characteristics: the ability to form cohesive, cooperative groups. Our ancestors didn't survive the world of tall grasses through strength or speed. They survived by learning to work together in ways no other species had achieved. Social living wasn't invented by hominins. Most primates live in groups, and our ancestors inherited this tendency from their forest-dwelling predecessors. But the transition to life in the grasslands intensified and transformed social behaviors in fundamental ways. The groups had to become larger, more cohesive, and more cooperative. The relationships within groups had to become more complex and nuanced. And the benefits of group living had to outweigh the considerable costs. More individuals meant more mouths to feed, more potential for conflict, and more complexity to navigate. The most immediate benefit of group living in the savanna was protection from predators. A solitary hominin, even standing tall to see over the grass, had only 2 eyes and could watch in only one direction at a time. But a group of 10 hominins had 20 eyes, capable of monitoring threats from all directions simultaneously. This vigilance effect is well documented in modern primates and social mammals. As group size increases, each individual can spend less time watching for predators and more time foraging, because the collective vigilance of the group provides security. Group living also provided what scientists call the dilution effect. In a group of 20 individuals, any given predator attack has only a 1 in 20 chance of targeting any particular individual. This simple mathematical reality meant that joining a group immediately improved each individual's survival odds. Furthermore, groups could engage in collective defense. While a lone hominin would be easy prey for a leopard, a group of hominins vocalizing loudly, throwing stones, and waving branches could make even a large predator reconsider its attack. Many predators prefer easy, low-risk prey, and a group that fights back is neither easy nor low-risk. But cooperation in early hominin groups went far beyond just watching for predators. One of the most revolutionary forms of cooperation was food sharing. In most primate species, individuals eat food where they find it. A chimpanzee who finds a fruit tree eats the fruit on the spot, perhaps allowing close relatives or high-status individuals to share, but generally not transporting food back to others. Our ancestors developed a different pattern. They began carrying food back to central locations where the entire group could share in the bounty. Archaeological evidence from ancient sites shows concentrations of stone tools and animal bones at specific locations, suggesting that our ancestors were bringing resources together rather than consuming them at the point of discovery. This behavior, which anthropologists call central place foraging, had profound implications. It meant that individuals who were successful in finding food shared with those who were unsuccessful that day. It meant that individuals who couldn't forage, perhaps because they were injured, sick, caring for infants, or too old to travel far, could still be fed and remain part of the group. This food sharing created a kind of social insurance system. On any given day, foraging success is unpredictable. One person might find a rich food source, while another finds nothing. But if everyone shares, the variance in daily intake is smoothed out. Everyone gets something, and no one faces starvation, even on unlucky days. Over time, this system benefited everyone, but it required trust, memory, and social enforcement. Individuals had to trust that if they shared today, others would share with them tomorrow. The group had to remember who shared and who tried to cheat the system. Cheaters, those who took shares but never contributed, had to be detected and punished, perhaps through exclusion or denial of future shares. Managing these complex social relationships required sophisticated cognitive abilities. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar has shown that across primate species, social group size correlates with brain size, particularly the size of the neocortex. The more social relationships an individual has to track, the more brain power is needed. Humans have the largest neocortex relative to body size of any primate, and Dunbar calculates that human cognitive capacity is suited for groups of about 150 individuals, a number that appears again and again in human societies from hunter-gatherer bands to modern social networks. Our ancestors didn't just need to remember who was in their group, they needed to track a complex web of relationships. Who was related to whom? Who was friends with whom? Who had helped whom in the past? Who had conflicts with whom? Who could be trusted and who couldn't? This cognitive bookkeeping, often called Machiavellian intelligence, required mental capacities that were unprecedented in the animal kingdom. The social complexity of hominin groups may have been one of the primary drivers of increasing brain size throughout human evolution. Cooperation in early hominin groups likely extended to childcare in ways that were unusual among primates. Humans are cooperative breeders, meaning that individuals other than the biological parents help care for offspring. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy has argued that this cooperative breeding was essential for human evolution because human infants are extraordinarily dependent and energy-intensive. A human mother alone cannot easily provide all the food and care needed for her helpless infant, while also obtaining enough calories for herself. But with help from grandmothers, older siblings, fathers, and other group members called leopards, mothers could successfully raise their demanding offspring. This cooperative breeding had cascading effects. It meant that older post-reproductive individuals, particularly grandmothers, had an important role in the group, helping to care for grandchildren and increasing their survival odds. This may explain why humans are one of the only species where females routinely survive well past their reproductive years. They continue to contribute to the survival of younger generations. Cooperative breeding also meant that human children were exposed to multiple caregivers from birth, helping them develop the social skills and understanding of others' minds that characterize human cognition. The division of labor within groups was another form of cooperation that increased overall efficiency. Rather than everyone doing everything, individuals could specialize based on their abilities and circumstances. Some individuals might focus on foraging for plant foods, becoming experts at locating and processing different plants throughout the seasons. Others might focus on scavenging animal carcasses, developing the knowledge and tools needed for this dangerous work. Still others might focus on toolmaking, developing the skills to create high-quality implements. As long as everyone shared the fruits of their labor, this specialization meant the group as a whole could exploit more resources more efficiently than if everyone was a generalist. Cooperation also enabled our ancestors to defend and maintain valuable resources. Water sources, tool-making sites, and productive foraging areas might need to be defended from other groups. A lone individual couldn't maintain control over such resources, but a cooperative group could. This may have led to the emergence of territoriality groups claiming and defending particular areas. The existence of territories would have required cooperation to patrol boundaries, confront intruders, and maintain group cohesion over an extended area. Communication was essential for this cooperation to work. Our ancestors needed ways to coordinate activities, share information about food sources and dangers, negotiate conflicts, and maintain social bonds. While we don't know when language evolved, it's clear that even before fully modern language existed, our ancestors had sophisticated communication systems. They could convey information about threats, coordinate group movements, and negotiate social relationships. The evolution of language itself was likely driven by the demands of managing complex cooperative relationships. But cooperation didn't eliminate conflict, it created new kinds of conflicts. Within groups, individuals competed for status, mates, and resources, even while cooperating for survival. Between groups, competition for territories and resources could be intense. Our ancestors had to navigate this tension between cooperation and competition, and different individuals likely had different strategies. Some might be more cooperative, building networks of trusted partners. Others might try to free ride, taking benefits while minimizing their contributions. Still others might be aggressive, using threats to gain resources. Managing these tensions required rules, social norms that specified acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Groups likely developed norms about sharing, sexual behavior, conflict resolution, and other crucial domains. Individuals who violated norms faced social sanctions, ranging from gossip and ostracism to physical punishment or expulsion from the group. These norms, enforced collectively, allowed larger groups to remain cohesive despite the potential for conflict. The cooperative nature of early hominin groups is often contrasted with the competitive, sometimes violent nature of our closest relatives, chimpanzees. Male chimpanzees form coalitions to compete for dominance and sometimes engage in lethal raids on neighboring groups. While humans certainly also engage in competition and violence, human groups show much higher levels of cooperation, both within and sometimes between groups. This heightened cooperation, shaped by millions of years of survival in the challenging grassland environment, became one of the defining features of our species. Cooperation also had a feedback effect on other human traits. As groups became more cooperative, individuals who were better at cooperating, who could read social cues, understand others' intentions, communicate effectively, and control their selfish impulses, were more successful. This created selection pressure for the cognitive and emotional traits that support cooperation: empathy, theory of mind, language, impulse control, and guilt. Over time, these traits became hardwired into human psychology, making us a uniquely cooperative species. In the world of tall grasses, where threats were constant and resources unpredictable, the strength of many was the key to survival. Our ancestors discovered that by working together, sharing food, defending against predators, caring for each other's young, and dividing labor, they could overcome the limitations that made each individual so vulnerable. This cooperative heritage is still with us today, manifested in our social nature, our ability to form complex organizations, our empathy for others, and our dependence on social connections for our well-being. The lesson from the grasslands was clear. Alone, we perish. Together, we survive. Chapter 6. The discovery. In the darkness of an African night 750,000 years ago, a group of hominins huddled together. But this time, there was something different, something that separated them from all their ancestors before. In the center of their gathering space, flames danced and crackled, casting flickering light that pushed back the darkness and kept the prowling predators at bay. Fire captured, controlled, and maintained would prove to be one of the most transformative discoveries in human evolutionary history, fundamentally changing how our ancestors survived in the world of tall grasses. The control of fire didn't happen suddenly. It was a gradual process that unfolded over hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, of years. The journey likely began with observation. Our ancestors would have encountered natural fires started by lightning strikes, which were common in the dry savannas where grass could ignite easily. They would have seen how animals fled these fires, how the flames transformed the landscape, and how smoldering embers could persist for hours or days after the visible flames died down. The first step was probably opportunistic use gathering fire from natural sources. A group might find smoldering wood after a wildfire and carefully transport it back to their living site, keeping it alive by adding fuel. Maintaining such a fire would have been a communal effort, with group members taking turns to ensure it didn't go out. Archaeological evidence suggests this kind of fire maintenance might have begun as early as 1.5 to 2 million years ago. Though the evidence is controversial and difficult to interpret, the earliest uncontroversial evidence of controlled fire use comes from sites like Gesher Banat Yaakov in Israel, dated to approximately 790,000 years ago. At this site, archaeologists found multiple hearths with concentrations of burned wood and stone tools showing heat damage, along with burned animal bones and plant materials. The pattern of burning was clearly not from natural wildfire, but represented intentional, controlled fires that were used repeatedly at specific locations. Our ancestors had progressed from simply gathering fire to maintaining it at chosen locations. The final step, actually making fire on demand, came even later, probably within the last 400,000 years. Making fire requires generating enough heat through friction to ignite tinder, a process that demands significant knowledge, skill, and patience. Methods like the fire drill spinning a wooden stick against another piece of wood to create friction heat, or striking flint against pyrite to create sparks, required understanding of materials, precision, and persistence. Once mastered, however, fire-making gave hominins true independence from the unpredictability of natural fires. The immediate benefits of fire for survival in the grasslands were numerous and powerful. Most obviously, fire provided warmth. While the African savanna could be scorchingly hot during the day, nights could become surprisingly cold, especially during dry seasons or at higher elevations. For hominins who had lost much of their body hair, an adaptation for cooling during daytime activity nighttime cold was a real challenge. Fire allowed our ancestors to maintain comfortable body temperatures through the night, conserving energy that would otherwise be spent shivering and potentially enabling them to survive in cooler climates. Fire also provided light, extending the useful hours of the day. Without fire, hominins were effectively blind at night, forced to huddle in trees or rocky shelters until dawn. But with fire, they could work, socialize, and remain active after sunset. This extended day allowed more time for tool-making, food processing, and social bonding. The hearth became a gathering place where stories could be shared, where young could learn from elders, where the social fabric of the group was woven and maintained. Protection from predators was perhaps the most immediately life-saving benefit of fire. Most predators are instinctively afraid of fire and will not approach an active flame. For hominins trying to sleep on the ground, no longer able to retreat to trees as effectively as their ancestors' fire created a protective barrier. A group sleeping around a fire was dramatically safer than a group sleeping in darkness. This protection may have been crucial for allowing hominins to fully commit to terrestrial life, spending nights on the ground rather than climbing to sleeping nests in trees. But the most revolutionary impact of fire was on diet, through cooking. When our ancestors began cooking food, it transformed human evolution in ways that continue to shape us today. Cooking has several profound effects on food. It breaks down tough fibers and cell walls, making nutrients more accessible. It denatures proteins, making them easier to digest. It kills pathogens and parasites that cause disease. It breaks down toxic compounds in many plants that would be dangerous if eaten raw. The net result is that cooked food provides significantly more usable calories and nutrients than the same food eaten raw. Evidence for cooking comes from multiple sources. At Gesher Banat Yaakov, the oldest clear evidence of cooking dates to 780,000 years. Ugo researchers found fish bones showing distinctive patterns of enamel crystallization that occurs only when bones are heated to cooking temperatures. The concentration of these burned fish bones in association with hearths demonstrates that our ancestors weren't just accidentally burning fish that fell in fires. They were deliberately cooking them before consumption. The impact of cooking on human evolution was enormous. With cooked food providing more calories with less effort, our ancestors could support larger, more energy-hungry brains. The human brain uses approximately 20% of the body's calories, despite being only about 2% of body weight. It is an extraordinarily expensive organ to maintain. Access to cooked, calorie-dense foods made this possible. Some researchers argue that the increase in brain size seen in Homo erectus around 1.8 million years ago was enabled by improved diet, possibly including cooked foods, though this remains debated. Cooking also allowed our ancestors to reduce the size of their teeth and digestive systems. Raw foods require extensive chewing. Chimpanzees spend about half their waking hours chewing food, but cooked food is soft and requires minimal chewing. Over time, natural selection favored individuals with smaller teeth and jaw muscles, as these structures were expensive to build and maintain and were no longer as necessary. Similarly, cooked food is easier to digest, requiring less intestinal processing. The human gut is significantly smaller than would be expected for a primate of our size, and this reduction freed up energy that could be redirected to the brain and other systems. The ability to cook expanded the range of foods available to our ancestors. Many plants that are toxic or indigestible when raw become safe and nutritious when cooked. Roots and tubers, which are underground storage organs packed with calories, but protected by tough cell walls and sometimes contain toxins, became a staple food once cooking technology was available. In environments where animal foods were scarce or difficult to obtain, the ability to exploit these plant resources through cooking could mean the difference between starvation and survival. Cooking also had social dimensions. Food preparation around a fire took time and created a natural gathering point. While food cooked, individuals could socialize, share information, and maintain relationships. The hearth became the center of social life. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers have documented the most significant social interactions: storytelling, conflict resolution, courtship, teaching, occur around the fire in the evening. This pattern likely extends deep into prehistory, with the fire serving as the focal point for human social and cultural life. Some researchers have proposed that smoking and drying meat might have been even earlier uses of fire than cooking. Raw meat spoils quickly, especially in hot climates, but smoke dries meat and inhibits bacterial growth, allowing it to be preserved for weeks or months. If our ancestors could preserve meat through smoking, they could exploit large carcasses more fully, taking meat away from a kill site and storing it for future consumption. This would have reduced the pressure to consume large quantities immediately and provided food security during periods when fresh food was scarce. Fire also enabled technological advances. Heat treatment of stone improved its flaking properties, allowing the creation of sharper, more refined tools. Archaeological evidence from southern Africa, dating to around 164,000 years ago, shows that our ancestors were deliberately heating silkwood stone to make it easier to work. Fire could be used to harden wooden spears, making them more effective. It could be used to produce adhesives like tar from birch bark, which could be used to attach stone points to wooden halves, creating composite tools more effective than either component alone. The mastery of fire also had psychological and symbolic dimensions. Fire is powerful and dangerous. It can protect but also destroy. Controlling it required knowledge, skill, and responsibility. Individuals who could make and manage fire likely gained status within their groups. Fire maintenance required cooperation and planning. Someone had to keep the fire going, gather fuel, and ensure it didn't spread dangerously. These requirements further reinforced the social cooperation that was already essential for survival. There is even speculation that gathering around fires in the evening may have influenced human communication and the evolution of language. The darkness outside the firelight and the faces illuminated by flames created ideal conditions for focused attention on speakers. The extended leisure time that fire provided when the day's foraging was done but people were yet ready to sleep gave time for extended communication, perhaps accelerating the development of complex language. In the world of tall grasses, where nights were dark and dangerous, where raw food was tough and difficult to digest, where cold could sap energy and predators prowled constantly, the control of fire transformed human existence. It was a technology that didn't just solve a single problem, it addressed multiple challenges simultaneously while creating new possibilities that our ancestors couldn't have imagined when they first captured flames from a lightning-struck tree. Fire, more than any single innovation except perhaps language, marked the point where hominins began to transcend their biological limitations and create their own ecological niche. From that first maintained flame to the lights of modern cities, fire has been humanity's companion, protector, and tool of discovery made in the grasslands that illuminates our path to this day. Chapter 7. Bodies Built for Endurance. The African sun beat down mercilessly as a group of hunters tracked their prey across the open savanna. Hour after hour they followed, not running at full speed, but maintaining a steady, relentless pace. The antelope they pursued was faster, much faster over short distances. But the humans had something the animal lacked, the ability to keep going. As the day wore on and the heat intensified, the antelope began to falter, overheating and exhausted, while the humans, though tired, pressed forward. This scene, still practiced by some indigenous hunters today, reveals one of humanity's most remarkable but underappreciated adaptations. We are built for endurance in ways that few other mammals can match. When we think about human physical capabilities, we often focus on our limitations. We're not as strong as chimpanzees, not as fast as gazelles, don't have the claws of cats or the teeth of wolves. But this focus on what we lack misses what we have: an extraordinary capacity for sustained physical activity, particularly in hot conditions. This endurance capacity was shaped by millions of years of survival in the grasslands and became one of the key advantages that allowed our ancestors to thrive. The human body's adaptations for endurance are numerous and interconnected, forming a system that is in some ways unique among mammals. Perhaps the most obvious is our bipedal locomotion itself. While we discussed earlier how walking on two legs provided visibility and freed the hands, bipedalism also makes humans remarkably efficient at long-distance travel. Studies comparing the energy expenditure of humans walking versus chimpanzees walking on all fours show that humans use about 75% less energy. This efficiency meant that our ancestors could cover much larger distances with the same caloric expenditure, allowing them to forage over wider areas and follow animal herds across vast territories. Our leg anatomy is specifically optimized for endurance. Humans have relatively long legs compared to our trunk, increasing stride length. We have a spring-like Achilles tendon that stores and releases elastic energy with each step, reducing the muscular work needed. Our foot arch acts as a shock absorber and lever, making walking and running more efficient. The gluteus maximus, the large buttock muscle, is huge in humans compared to other primates, providing the power needed for sustained upright locomotion. All these features make humans exceptionally good at walking and jogging for extended periods. But endurance capacity is about more than just efficient locomotion. It's also about thermoregulation, the ability to manage body temperature. Most mammals cool themselves primarily through panting, which requires them to slow down or stop moving. But humans have a different system. We sweat. The human body is covered with approximately 2 to 4 million eccrine sweat glands, far more than any other primate. When we overheat, these glands secrete watery sweat onto the skin surface. And as this water evaporates, it draws heat away from the body, cooling us down. This sweating ability is paired with another unique human trait. We're relatively hairless. While we retain hair on our heads, protection from the sun on our most exposed surface, and in a few other areas, most of our body surface is bare skin. This hairlessness allows sweat to evaporate efficiently and provides maximum cooling effect. A fur-covered animal might sweat, but the moisture would be trapped in the fur, providing little cooling benefit. The combination of efficient bipedalism, prolific sweating, and hairless skin meant that our ancestors could remain active during the hottest parts of the day, when most predators and prey animals were forced to rest. This ability gave them a unique temporal niche. They could forage during midday hours when competition was reduced and danger from predators was lower because those predators were also heat-stressed and less active. Some anthropologists have proposed that our ancestors used a hunting technique called persistence hunting, which exploits this endurance advantage. In persistence hunting, humans track an animal and follow it relentlessly for hours, not trying to catch it immediately, but simply keeping it moving. Most mammals can sprint much faster than humans, but must then stop to cool down through panting. If prevented from resting, they eventually succumb to heat exhaustion. Humans, meanwhile, can maintain a moderate pace for hours without overheating, eventually running down even much faster prey. Evidence for persistence hunting comes from several sources. Some modern hunter-gatherers, including the San people of southern Africa, still practice it occasionally. Anthropologists have documented hunts lasting 4 to 6 hours and temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, with hunters eventually catching animals that have collapsed from heat exhaustion. These observations demonstrate that persistence hunting is physically possible for humans and can be successful, though debates continue about how commonly it was practiced by ancient hominins. The anatomy of Homo erectus, which appears in the fossil record about 1.8 million years ago, shows many features consistent with endurance running. Homo erectus had long legs relative to body size, a body shape adapted for heat dissipation, tall and lean, and skeletal features suggesting strong Achilles tendons and spring-like mechanisms in the feet and legs. These features suggest that by this point in human evolution, our ancestors were fully adapted for sustained running and walking. Not just occasional bipedal locomotion. Endurance capacity wasn't just useful for hunting. It was essential for the mobile foraging lifestyle of grassland hominins. In environments where food and water sources were scattered across large areas, the ability to walk long distances day after day was crucial. Modern hunter-gatherers often travel 6 to 10 miles per day while foraging, and during seasonal migrations or in particularly harsh environments, they may travel much farther. Our ancestors needed similar mobility to survive. The cardiovascular and respiratory systems of humans are also adapted for endurance. We have relatively large hearts and lungs for our body size, efficient oxygen transport in our blood, and metabolic systems capable of sustaining moderate activity for extended periods. While we can't match the cardiovascular capacity of animals like horses or dogs that have been specifically selected for extreme endurance, humans are unusually capable among primates. A fit human can maintain moderate exercise for hours, something that would quickly exhaust most other primates. Our fuel systems are also adapted for endurance. Humans store energy both as glycogen, sugar, in muscles and liver, and as fat throughout the body. While glycogen provides quick energy for intense activity, it's depleted relatively quickly. Fat provides much more stored energy, but can only be used for moderate intensity activity. The human body is remarkably good at using fat as fuel during sustained, moderate exercise, the kind of activity involved in walking or jogging for hours. This metabolic flexibility allowed our ancestors to maintain activity even when they hadn't eaten recently, drawing on stored fat reserves to fuel extended foraging or travel. Interestingly, humans also show psychological adaptations for endurance. We can motivate ourselves to continue unpleasant activities when we believe they will lead to rewards. We can pace ourselves, deliberately moderating effort to ensure we don't exhaust ourselves too early. We experience what some call runner's high, a positive psychological state during extended exercise, possibly mediated by endorphins and endocannabinoids that may help motivate sustained activity. These psychological traits complement our physical endurance capabilities. Gender differences in endurance capabilities are noteworthy. While males generally have greater upper body strength and slightly higher cardiovascular capacity, differences in endurance are smaller than in many other physical domains. Women, with their higher body fat percentages, may actually have advantages in ultra-endurance activities where stored fat becomes the primary fuel source. This relative parity in endurance capability would have been important in prehistoric times when both males and females needed to travel long distances while foraging. The endurance adaptations of humans also influenced our social lives and cognitive development. Extended foraging trips required planning and memory, knowing where to find food at different seasons, remembering the locations of water sources, planning routes that would be efficient and safe. The ability to travel widely expanded the social networks of our ancestors, allowing contact with other groups and exchange of mates, information, and goods over larger areas than would be possible for less mobile species. Climate and environmental change also played roles in shaping our endurance adaptations. As grasslands expanded and resources became more dispersed, mobility became increasingly important. Groups that could travel farther while expending less energy had access to more food sources and were less vulnerable to local shortages. The oscillating climate of the Pleistocene, with its swings between wetter and drier periods, meant that the locations of reliable food and water sources changed over time, further rewarding mobility and endurance. In the world of tall grasses, where food and water were scattered, where predators could be outrun over long distances but not outsprinted, where the midday heat forced most animals to rest, our ancestors' endurance capabilities provided crucial advantages. While they couldn't match the speed of predators or prey over short distances, they could outlast almost anything over extended periods. This endurance, physical, metabolic, and psychological, became one of the defining traits of humanity, allowing our ancestors not just to survive, but to range across vast territories, exploiting resources that less mobile species couldn't reach. Today, when we go for a long walk or run a marathon, we're drawing on adaptations refined over millions of years in the grasslands of Africa, using bodies built not for power or speed, but for the steady, relentless endurance that defined human survival. Chapter 8. The evolution of bigger brains. Inside the skull of every human resides the most complex structure in the known universe, the human brain, containing approximately 86 billion neurons interconnected by trillions of synapses. This remarkable organ, which consumes a disproportionate 20% of our body's energy while comprising only 2% of our body weight, didn't evolve in isolation. It was shaped, refined, and expanded over millions of years in the grasslands of Africa, where cognitive capacity became as important for survival as any physical trait. The story of human brain evolution is one of dramatic expansion. Our distant ape ancestors had brains of about 400 cubic centimeters, comparable to modern chimpanzees. Early hominins like Australopithecus had slightly larger brains, around 450 to 550 cubic centimeters, but still within the range of what we see in other apes. Then, beginning around 2.5 million years ago with early Homo species, something remarkable happened. Brains began growing rapidly. Homo habilis had brains of about 600 to 750 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus, appearing around 1.8 million years ago, reached 900 to 1,100 cubic centimeters. By the time Homo sapiens emerged, average brain size had reached 30 and 50 cubic centimeters, more than triple the size of our ape ancestors. This expansion came at significant costs. Large brains are expensive to build and maintain. A human infant's brain requires enormous amounts of energy for growth, so much that human children grow more slowly and reach sexual maturity later than other apes. Pregnant and nursing mothers require substantially more calories to support developing and growing brains in their offspring. Birth itself became more dangerous as infant head size increased, while the birth canal remained constrained by the requirements of bipedal locomotion. Human infants are born at an earlier stage of development than other primates, essentially still fetuses, because if we waited until brain development was complete, their heads would be too large to pass through the birth canal. Given these enormous costs, brain expansion must have provided substantial survival benefits to be favored by natural selection. What were those benefits? The answer lies in understanding what brains do and why larger, more complex brains are advantageous in certain environments, particularly in the variable, challenging grassland environments where our ancestors lived. Brains are fundamentally organs of behavioral flexibility. They allow organisms to respond to environmental conditions with flexible, learned behaviors rather than relying solely on instinctive, hardwired responses. For animals living in stable, predictable environments, extensive behavioral flexibility isn't particularly advantageous. Instinctive behaviors that are well adapted to the stable conditions work fine. But in variable, unpredictable environments where conditions change frequently and where different strategies might be optimal at different times, behavioral flexibility becomes crucial. The Pleistocene epoch, during which most human brain evolution occurred, was characterized by dramatic climate fluctuations. Ice ages alternated with warmer periods, rainfall patterns shifted, and the availability of resources changed rapidly. Anthropologist Rick Potts proposed the variability selection hypothesis, suggesting that it was this environmental instability, not adaptation to any single environment, that drove human evolution. In a variable world, the most successful organisms weren't necessarily those best adapted to one specific condition, but those flexible enough to cope with changing conditions. In this context, larger brains provided the capacity for more sophisticated problem solving, better memory, improved planning, and more flexible behavior, all advantages in an unpredictable environment. If plant foods became scarce, individuals with better problem-solving abilities could figure out how to access alternative foods, perhaps through tool use or new processing techniques. If predators changed their hunting patterns, individuals with better predictive abilities could anticipate and avoid dangers. If social relationships became more complex, individuals with better social intelligence could navigate alliances and conflicts more successfully. The social intelligence hypothesis, also called the Machiavellian intelligence hypothesis, proposes that much of human cognitive evolution was driven by the demands of living in complex social groups. As we discussed in the chapter on cooperation, managing relationships in large groups requires tracking numerous individuals, remembering past interactions, predicting others' behaviors, understanding others' beliefs and intentions, and coordinating activities. These cognitive demands are substantial and appear to correlate with brain size across primate species. Tool use and technology also drove brain evolution. Creating even simple stone tools requires planning, fine motor control, understanding of material properties, and the ability to imagine a desired end product and work backwards to figure out how to create it. As tool technologies became more sophisticated, the cognitive demands increased. Teaching others how to make tools required the ability to break down complex processes into steps and communicate them effectively. Innovating new tools required creativity and experimentation. Archaeological evidence shows that tool complexity increased roughly in parallel with brain size, suggesting a co-evolutionary relationship. Diet and brain size are also intimately connected. The expensive tissue hypothesis, proposed by anthropologists Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler, suggests that the energy saved by reducing gut size when diet quality improved through cooking and eating more meat was redirected to brain growth. Brains and guts are both energetically expensive organs, and total body energy budget is limited. If diet quality improves and food becomes easier to digest, a smaller gut is sufficient, freeing up energy for other purposes. This energy could support a larger, more capable brain. Language evolution was both a cause and consequence of brain expansion. The neural circuitry required for language areas for speech production, comprehension, grammar processing, and the integration of language with other cognitive functions requires substantial brain tissue. But language, once evolved, provided massive advantages. It allowed knowledge to be transmitted across generations with much higher fidelity than other forms of social learning. It enabled cooperation on a scale impossible without language. It allowed abstract thinking and planning. Language and brain size appear to have co-evolved, each advance in one enabling and driving advances in the other. Memory systems in the brain also expanded with increasing brain size. Living successfully in the grasslands required remembering the locations of food sources and water, and how these changed seasonally. It required remembering which plants were edible and which were poisonous, which could be eaten raw and which required processing. It required remembering past interactions with group members, obligations and debts, alliances and conflicts. It required remembering navigation routes across large territories. All these memory demands favored individuals with more capable memory. Systems. Planning and prospection, the ability to imagine future scenarios and plan for them, were crucial. Cognitive abilities in the grassland environment. Our ancestors needed to plan seasonal movements, prepare for dry seasons when food would be scarce, collect and store foods and materials for future use, and anticipate challenges and prepare solutions in advance. These future-oriented cognitive abilities require substantial neural machinery and were likely important selective factors, favoring brain expansion, the development of cumulative culture, where innovations build on previous innovations across generations, leading to progressively more sophisticated technologies and knowledge, created a positive feedback loop with brain evolution. Larger brains enabled more sophisticated culture, but living in an environment rich with cultural knowledge also created selection pressure for individuals capable of learning and benefiting from that cultural knowledge. Children born into groups with extensive cultural knowledge needed larger, more capable brains to absorb and use that knowledge effectively. Different brain regions expanded at different rates during human evolution. The neocortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for higher cognitive functions, expanded, particularly dramatically. Within the neocortex, regions associated with social cognition, Language, executive function, and planning showed the greatest expansion. Brain organization also became more complex, with more specialized regions and more connections between regions, allowing more sophisticated information processing. Interestingly, brain size stopped increasing and may have even decreased slightly in the last 20,000 years. Average brain size in anatomically modern humans from 20,000 years ago was slightly larger than contemporary humans. Why would this be? Several hypotheses exist. Perhaps as societies became more complex and specialized, individuals needed less general knowledge because they could rely on specialists. Perhaps dietary quality improved further with agriculture, allowing smaller guts and also slightly smaller brains. Perhaps the cognitive demands of hunter-gatherer life invariable. Environments were actually greater than those of agricultural societies with more stable, predictable food sources. The evolution of larger brains fundamentally transformed what it meant to be human. Our ancestors weren't the strongest or fastest creatures in the grasslands, but they became the most cognitively flexible, capable of solving novel problems, learning from experience, imagining future scenarios, and transmitting knowledge across generations. These cognitive capabilities, housed in increasingly large and sophisticated brains, allowed hominins to transcend many of their physical limitations. They couldn't outrun predators, but they could outsmart them. They couldn't overpower large prey, but they could plan cooperative hunts or develop tools that gave them advantages. They couldn't change their physical form quickly through biological evolution, but they could change their behavior and culture rapidly through learning and innovation. In the world of tall grasses, where survival required not just physical capabilities but mental ones, where memory, planning, social intelligence, and creativity were as important as strength or speed, our ancestors' expanding brains became their most powerful survival tool. The human brain, shaped by millions of years of challenges in the African grasslands, remains our species' defining characteristic and our greatest asset. It allowed our ancestors to survive in an environment that should have killed them, and it continues to allow us to adapt to new challenges, solve complex problems, and imagine futures that don't yet exist. The grasslands selected for intelligence, and in doing so, they created a species capable of transforming not just themselves, but the entire planet. Chapter 9. Learning the landscape. A human without knowledge is as helpless as a newborn. Strip away everything a person has learned: language, tool use, knowledge of foods, understanding of dangers, social skills, and what remains is a vulnerable animal ill-equipped for survival. This dependence on learned knowledge, rather than instinctive behaviors, became one of humanity's defining characteristics and was essential for survival in the complex, variable grassland environment. Our ancestors had to become expert observers, skilled learners, and dedicated teachers, passing accumulated wisdom from one generation to the next. The grassland environment presented cognitive challenges that were unprecedented in complexity. Unlike a forest, where food sources are relatively obvious and concentrated in trees, the savanna required extensive knowledge to exploit successfully. Which of the hundreds of grass species produce edible seeds? Which roots and tubers are nutritious, and which are poisonous? Where can these be found, and how do their locations change with season? Which animals can be safely scavenged, and which are too dangerous to approach? Where are the water sources, and how do they fluctuate throughout the year? How do you recognize signs of predators, and how do you respond to different threats? This knowledge couldn't be acquired through instinct. The environment was too variable, with too many species and too much seasonal and local variation. The only way to acquire this information was through experience, either personal experience, which is costly and potentially fatal if mistakes are made, or social learning from others who already possess the knowledge. Our ancestors became exceptionally good at social learning, developing capacities that far exceeded those of other primates. Human children are born as learning machines. Compared to animals, human infants are extraordinarily helpless and take an incredibly long time to mature. This extended childhood, which lasts well over a decade before full independence, is primarily a learning period. During these years, children observe adults intensely, practice skills repeatedly, and gradually acquire the enormous body of knowledge needed to survive and thrive. This pattern of extended childhood is rare in nature because its costly children consume resources without contributing much in return for many years. The fact that this pattern evolved and persisted tells us that the knowledge being acquired during childhood was crucial for survival. Teaching, as an intentional activity where knowledgeable individuals help less knowledgeable ones learn, appears to be uniquely elaborated in humans. While other animals show some forms of teaching, humans are exceptional in the extent, complexity, and intentionality of their teaching. Adults don't just tolerate children watching them work. They actively instruct, demonstrate, correct, and explain. They simplify tasks to make them easier for learners, provide feedback, and gradually increase difficulty as learners become more competent. Toolmaking provides a clear example of the importance of teaching in human societies. Making even simple stone tools requires understanding which stones are suitable, how to strike them to produce useful flakes, and how to control the flaking process to create desired forms. Learning this through individual trial and error would be extremely time-consuming and wasteful of materials. But with teaching, where an experienced napper demonstrates techniques, corrects errors, and explains principles, learners can acquire skills much more efficiently. The concept of cumulative culture describes how human knowledge and technology build on previous innovations across generations. A child doesn't need to reinvent fire, stone tools, and cooking. They learn these from the previous generation. This means each generation can start where the previous one left off, adding new innovations rather than rediscovering what was already known. Over time, this accumulation leads to technologies and knowledge systems far more sophisticated than any individual could develop in a lifetime. The Grasslands were the proving ground for this cumulative cultural system. Memory became a crucial survival tool in the grassland environment. Spatial memory, remembering locations, was essential for finding scattered resources and navigating across large territories. Our ancestors needed to remember where fruit trees were located, when different plants produced edible parts, where water sources could be found during different seasons, and which routes between resources were safest. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show that they possess incredibly detailed spatial knowledge of vast territories, remembering thousands of specific locations and their characteristics. Semantic memory for facts and concepts was equally important. Knowing which plants are edible, which require processing before eating, which have medicinal properties, and which are poisonous is life or death information. This knowledge must be acquired through learning, either from direct experience or from others, and stored in memory for future use. The human capacity for semantic memory is exceptional among animals, allowing us to store and retrieve vast amounts of factual information. Episodic memory for personal experiences also played important roles. Remembering past encounters with predators, previous visits to food sources, outcomes of different strategies, and interactions with other individuals all informed future decisions. This experiential knowledge complemented factual knowledge, providing nuanced understanding that went beyond simple facts to include contextual and situational information. The transmission of knowledge across generations created what anthropologists call cultural niche construction. Our ancestors didn't just adapt to their environment biologically, they created cultural Environments that influenced selection pressures. For example, once tool-making became widespread, individuals who were better at learning tool-making skills had survival advantages. This created selection pressure for cognitive abilities related to social learning, fine motor control, and spatial reasoning. Similarly, once cooking became established, individuals with smaller teeth and shorter guts were no longer disadvantaged, allowing biological changes that wouldn't have been possible without the cultural innovation of cooking. Language was the ultimate knowledge transmission system. While observation and imitation can transmit many skills, language allows the transmission of abstract concepts, explanations of why things work as they do, and communication about things not immediately present. Language allows a knowledgeable elder to tell young people about dangers they haven't encountered, foods they haven't tried, or places they haven't visited. It allows discussion of past events and planning for future ones. The evolution of language, occurring sometime in the last few 100,000 years, dramatically accelerated the rate at which knowledge could be transmitted and the complexity of knowledge that could be maintained across generations. Ecological knowledge understanding of plants, animals, weather patterns, and environmental relationships was perhaps the most extensive category of knowledge our ancestors needed. Modern hunter-gatherers typically can identify and use hundreds of plant species, understand the behaviors and habitats of dozens of animal species, predict weather patterns, and navigate using environmental cues. This knowledge is highly detailed and specialized to local environments, and acquiring it requires years of learning and experience. Social knowledge was equally complex. Understanding the relationships, alliances, conflicts, obligations, and histories of dozens of individuals within a group required sophisticated social cognition. Knowing how to negotiate conflicts, form alliances, participate in reciprocal relationships, and navigate status hierarchies required both observation of others and direct social experience. This social knowledge was continually updated as relationships changed, and new information became available. Procedural knowledge, knowing how to do things, encompassed a vast range of skills. Tool-making, fire-making, food processing, tracking animals, recognizing signs of predators, constructing shelters, navigating territories, treating injuries and illnesses. All these practical skills had to be learned and practiced. Unlike factual knowledge that can be communicated relatively quickly through language, procedural knowledge requires extensive practice to develop proficiency. Our ancestors needed years to become skilled at the various techniques essential for survival. Seasonal knowledge was crucial in environments where resources and conditions changed throughout the year. Knowing when different plants produced edible parts, when animals migrated or bred, when rains would come and go, and when rivers would flood or dry up, required attention to cyclical patterns. This knowledge allowed our ancestors to plan activities, move to appropriate locations at appropriate times, and prepare for predictable changes in conditions. The human capacity for mental mapping, creating internal representations of spatial relationships, allowed our ancestors to navigate efficiently across large territories, rather than wandering randomly or following memorized routes. Humans can create flexible mental maps that allow navigation by multiple routes, shortcuts when obstacles appear, and efficient planning of foraging circuits. This cognitive capacity requires substantial neural machinery, but provides enormous advantages in environments where resources are scattered and mobility is essential. Innovation and creativity, while building on existing knowledge, also required going beyond what was known. When familiar strategies failed or new challenges arose, individuals who could imagine novel solutions and experiment with new approaches had advantages. The human capacity for imagination, mentally representing things that don't currently exist, allowed our ancestors to innovate new tools, develop new techniques, and solve problems in creative ways. This capacity for innovation, combined with social transmission of successful innovations, drove the progressive accumulation of cultural knowledge taught in the world of tall grasses, where survival required not just physical capabilities, but vast stores of knowledge acquired through years of learning. Our ancestors became the ultimate learners and teachers. They developed cognitive capacities for observation, memory, instruction, and innovation that exceeded anything seen in other species. They created cultural systems where knowledge was preserved, transmitted, and elaborated across generations, allowing each generation to benefit from the accumulated wisdom of all previous generations. This dependence on learned knowledge made humans uniquely flexible and adaptable, capable of surviving in diverse environments by learning appropriate strategies, rather than requiring biological adaptations to each specific environment. The Grasslands taught our ancestors that knowledge was power, and in learning this lesson, they became a species defined not by physical prowess, but by cognitive capability and cultural transmission. Perhaps most importantly, understanding that we are products of a particular evolutionary history helps us understand both our capabilities and our limitations. We aren't infinitely flexible. We have evolved tendencies, preferences, and capacities that constrain our behavior. But neither are we prisoners of our evolution. We have remarkable abilities to change our behavior, modify our environments, and create cultural solutions to challenges. The Grasslands made us what we are, a species uniquely dependent on culture, cooperation, and cognition for survival. The world of tall grasses, which seemed so hostile to our ancestors, became the crucible in which humanity was forged. The challenges faced there: predators, scarce resources, variable environments. Complex social dynamics drove the evolution of traits that define our species. Every time we walk upright, use tools, share food, teach a child, solve a problem, or work together toward a common goal, we're drawing on adaptations refined over millions of years in the African savannas. We left the grasslands long ago, spraying across the globe and creating radically different environments and lifestyles. But the grasslands never left us. They're encoded in our genes, reflected in our bodies, embedded in our psychology, and expressed in our societies. We are, in a profound sense, savanna apes bipedal, big-brained, cooperative, tool-using primates whose remarkable success across the planet began with the struggle to survive in a world of tall grasses. Understanding this origin story isn't just about appreciating our past. It's about understanding ourselves in the present and navigating our future with wisdom drawn from 3 million years of survival, adaptation, and triumph against the odds. As we close this journey through the world of tall grasses, we return to where we began, a vulnerable creature standing upright amid vegetation that towers overhead, surrounded by dangers, facing challenges that should have been insurmountable. But now we understand how that impossible survival became not just possible, but the foundation for humanity's remarkable story. Our ancestors survived in the world of tall grasses not through any single adaptation, but through a suite of interconnected changes that reinforced each other. Bipedalism freed the hands, which enabled tool use, which expanded diet, which supported larger brains, which enabled better cooperation and innovation, which allowed more effective resource acquisition, which supported even larger populations and more complex societies. Each adaptation created new possibilities that drove further adaptations in a positive feedback loop that eventually produced modern humans. The grasslands taught our ancestors lessons that remain relevant today. They learned that cooperation trumps individual competition when challenges are great. They learned that knowledge, transmitted across generations, provides more flexibility than instinct alone. They learned that tools and technology can overcome physical limitations. They learned that flexibility and adaptability are more valuable than specialization in variable environments. These lessons, learned over millions of years, became part of our biological and cultural inheritance. The journey from those early hominins, barely surviving in the shadow of predators, to modern humans capable of transforming the planet, is almost unfathomable in its scope. Yet it happened step by step, generation by generation, adaptation by adaptation. Each small innovation, each behavioral change, each cognitive advance built upon what came before, creating the cumulative process that led from Australopithecines standing uncertainly on two legs to humans walking on the moon. Today, we face new challenges: climate change, resource depletion, pandemics, social divisions that seem as daunting as the challenges faced by our ancestors in the grasslands. But we carry within us the legacy of those survivors, the creativity to innovate solutions, the intelligence to learn and adapt, the social capacity to cooperate at scale, and the flexibility to change when circumstances demanded. The same traits that allowed our ancestors to survive in the world of tall grasses can help us navigate the challenges of our time. The story of how early humans survived in the world of tall grasses is ultimately a story about overcoming limitations through cooperation, innovation, and persistence. It reminds us that vulnerability can be transformed into strength, that physical weakness can be compensated by mental power, and that individuals working together can achieve what no individual could accomplish alone. These insights, drawn from our evolutionary past, offer hope and guidance as we face the future, a future that our grassland forged capabilities have made both possible and challenging. The tall grasses of Africa may seem far removed from our modern world, but they are forever part of who we are. In every step we take, every tool we use, every idea we share, every challenge we face together, we carry forward the legacy of our ancestors who learned to survive and eventually thrive in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Their story is our story, and their survival made everything that followed, including this moment, possible.